Hi everybody, this is Jason Eagle, your natural health authority with another Healing Matters. And you can find my website, strategichealing.us. You can also find me online, Jason Eagle QRA. And today we're talking about lungs and breathing problems, especially now with the whole craziness of people being in the hospital and apparently there's something going around that people's lungs fill up with fluid, and they have to be put on ventilators, and then they die in their own fluid and stuff like that. Pneumonia. This has always happened, but apparently something going on right now that makes it worse. Now, is it that? And I'm going to talk about that what's underlying a lot of lung problems is infection, but it's not necessarily the infection that you think. Not necessarily viral. It could be a whole lot of things that trigger viral. And when people do have the lung problems, this viral thing, it's actually the bacterial stuff that their lungs get swampy. And most of the people, if not 99% of them, they already had lung concerns. They already had lung problems. But see, are the lungs your lungs? What are your lungs? Your lungs are in Chinese medicine, your lungs are a backup large intestine. Large intestine, isn't that where poop comes from? Yes. So large intestine is what handles your waste products. So, and your exhale, one of my videos I've done before is your exhale is poop. Literally, it's a waste product. So you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide and other gases, which are your essentially waste products. So your lungs are poop, right? Because it's bringing stuff in, but it's getting rid of the bad stuff. And then also your lungs can fill up with phlegm and other stuff, mucus that's not just in your snot and your nose, but it's also inside your lungs. When people start coughing chunks up and stuff like that, and if it's yellow or green, that's infection. But if it's, say, clear, or if it's that thick, sticky stuff, it's because it's a glue to grab onto stuff, whether it be pollen and bacteria and other things, and trap it and kill it. And actually your phlegm and your mucus is like an antibiotic. It's like a handy wipe, which is it will kill stuff on contact. And your whole lining of your nose, your mouth, from top to bottom is this epithelial cells or mucosal membranes, including your eyes. All your sticky parts are definitely lined with this mucus that is, if you're healthy and it's the way it's supposed to be, and it's not too thick and it's just the right, fluidity, not too thin, not too thick, just the right, then what it will do is it will grab with stuff, trap it, kill it, and then carry it away, okay? A lot of people blame smoking, okay? Smoking is not... Yeah, smoking's bad. Long time smoking absolutely is a huge problem. And what we're seeing now actually is the vaping, which is it's the healthier than smoking. No, it's not. It's by far worse. Especially if you live in the northern climates where it gets cold in the wintertime and people are breathing this vape stuff in and then breathing in, let's say it's below zero outside, you're breathing in it, it crystallizes in your lungs and damages your lungs. And there's all kinds of chemicals. There's all kinds of evil stuff that's in there. But usually people that have damaged smoking lungs, they had damage from other things. And is it the smoking or is it the other stuff? And 9 times out of 10, it's the other stuff. It's the hidden stuff that you don't know about. Again, you don't really know how your lungs work. Also, your lungs is cardiovascular, which is it's your heart, right? And then also I'm going to tell you another thing. Your lungs are not only your intestines, your stomach, but your lungs are your teeth. Whoa, that's weird. What are you talking about? Okay, so one of the greatest toxins known to man is arsenic. Okay, arsenic is a horrible toxin. And arsenic gas is even worse, right? You can kill people within the gas chamber by putting them in the arsenic gas or cyanide gas. Even worse, cyanide gas. Cyanide is basically, it's a gas that will kill you. Okay, well, where the heck does cyanide come? And that's what we're finding is people are getting cyanide poisoning, and that's what's damaging the lungs. The lungs build up scar tissue. The lungs build up The phlegm and other things, a lot of times the phlegm is, the mucus is to protect your lungs from damage. Also, we think it's just to protect it from the dust and the pollen and other stuff. No, it can be coming from, let's say, where's this gas coming from? This gas is coming from your teeth. If you have gingivitis, if you have dental infection, but in particular gum infection, the bacteria that live inside your gums, in your roots, underneath where you can't floss, deep inside there, and the older you get, the worse you get. That's that bad breath. When you smell people with the bad breath, that poop breath, that's cyanide gas. That's what you're smelling. It smells like sulfur also too. People can smell like, sulfur and brimstone. That's from the stuff that's coming in their teeth. And the dentist, will maybe do a cleaning and say, you're fine. But we know that gingivitis, which would be the gum disease, is one of the leading causes of heart disease, and because it's a poison and it's these bacterias. So the bacterias get into the bloodstream and they attack your body. And one of the things that they do is they cause your red blood cells to be filled with these nanobacteria, and they're trying to get inside your body as they're flowing through the pipes of your veins and arteries. And they start scraping at your insides, and that's why your body produces the plaque and the smooth muscle tissue. It's not just from the fat in the burgers, and it's not just from the sugar, it's from this nanobacteria infection. And one of the first places it gets in through your teeth. Now, the other thing is, if you have, let's say, for instance, good enough gingivitis, these bacteria that live inside the gum pockets, they are what's called anaerobic. They don't like oxygen. They get away from oxygen. And when they respirate and actually produce waste products, because they're living inside you, they're like bums living in your backyard, but they're living in your teeth. And they're eating and pooping, and their poop creates a gas. And the cyanide gas is one of so many of the bacteria are what's called cyanobacterias. That's why. It's because they create a gas. They're like, in Star Wars, there's certain creatures that have to wear certain masks on different planets. And one of the most common creatures that wear masks in the Star Wars universe are cyanobreathers or methane breathers. Animals or creatures that, this is, space, but it's true here on this planet that there are different environments for different creatures. And some creatures, we are oxygen breathers. Carbon dioxide will kill us, okay? But then there's other breathers, and methane that comes from, that's the cow farts, but that's also coming from, let's say, fermented, compost heaps and stuff like that. Where's that coming from? The methane is coming from the breakdown of these bacteria that live in all these other living life forms that live. Well, your body is a compost heap. Your guts is a compost heap. And, it's amazing that we're not a bloated, rotting corpse in front of everybody. Like, what's keeping us alive is amazing. Our immune system is amazing. And especially with these really, really toxic things, creating what's, like I call the cyanobacterias. They create that gas, which then goes into and you breathe it, and it goes into your lungs. It's just you're constantly breathing your own breath, okay? But they create that gas because they live in that environment. And that's why good dental treatments, like some of the top, there's good gingivitis treatments. Dr. Eric Taylor, is a really good periodontist. Dr. Nemeth here in Michigan is another good periodontist. They're using lasers. Dr. Taylor now has ozone, which he will inject ozone gas into as he's lasering and scraping and cleaning, which is the ozone is 3 oxygens, and that will kill those guys. You put an oxygen into a non-oxygen breather, a cyanobacteria or a methane breather, and it will kill them, and it will basically sanitize them and get them out. So, like I said, this whole show is about the lungs, and one of the top things is it's staring you right in front of your face. And many people, and again, many of these emergency room docs who, are dealing with people that are coming in, and it's always been true. We've always had the flu, and we've always had people that have, pneumonia and get lung problems. It's very, very common. But it's very common in sick people. It's very common, and it's not just the smokers. It's very common in overweight people. And here's what they're missing. It's very common in people with bad teeth. Also, you'll find a lot of people with bad lungs, they got bad heart, cardiovascular. Well, if it's coming from the teeth, you nailed it. Coming from the teeth, the guts, internal infection, that's where it's coming from. The damage on the heart as well as the damage on the lungs is coming from that. These are the first places to look. Another thing that's really common with lung problems is parasitic infection. We live here in America and we don't think that we have parasites. Yeah, we got parasites. And even the doctors that went to medical school and were taught, listen, this is all these parasite thing. Like, yes, if you live in Haiti or if you live in Malaysia or something like that, or Cambodia, but like, this is America. Okay, but it's been 20, 30 years since people have been coming over in airplanes and living here and working with us and preparing our foods. And so they're here. Whether you went there or not, they're here. And we've always had parasites. America has always been rife with what's called the liver flukes and the flatworms. And if you're a parent, like almost, if your kids are out there playing in the dirt, getting dirt under their fingernails, most kids are going to get pinworms. Most kids are going to get some form of, kids get lice, kids get all kinds of parasites and stuff like that. And it doesn't mean they're dirty. It doesn't mean that they're poor. This is just all over the place. What it does mean is they have low hydrochloric acid and they have low salt. Because the kids, so you can cure, you get a kid that gets pinworms, of which they put, as well as scabies. If that's what ivermectin is for. That's what a number of these other things are used as an anti-parasitic. It's a key. These things really work. They've always been around. They're not just some new type of, no. And they're not over the counter. They're spreading this misinformation on the news, which is, people are not getting the jab and they're thinking this ivermectin, which is over the counter. Ivermectin's not over the counter. Hydroxychloroquine's not over the counter. You can't buy that in the CVS. The only place you can buy ivermectin over the counter is in a Tractor Supply, because you buy it for animals. You buy it for your cows and stuff like that. No, it's a prescription. You have to have your doctor. And what have they used it for? They've used it for kids with parasites. Kids with parasites and scabies and lice and all this other stuff, these different types of parasites, have been used. Ivermectin is very useful. Now, it's not just the kids that get parasites. And you can have a kid that has parasites and, you don't notice it. And you're an adult, and then they become, tapeworms are all around. We have the Giardia, the single-celled organisms that are in water, all kinds of things. You take a person that's a little bit older, that's got some dental infection and poor eating and bad pH and low hydrochloric acid, they can be full of parasites. And the parasites are another thing that live in the lung tissue and also produce waste products. So you can have parasites that live in the guts that produce waste products that has to get outside of your body. And like I said, if we have a backup of the large intestine, if our filter organs, kidneys, other things are not filtering fast enough, it starts to back up into the lungs. It's not just the smoking. You put on top of that smoking and vaping and other stupid stuff like that, or another thing, you take grandma or grandpa who's covered in cologne and perfume and they've got, stick-ups and all kinds of perfumey stuff everywhere they go, as well as, all of their clothes are washed in some form of, like, you can smell them. People that smell like a dryer, laundry dryer thing, like full of perfume, and they don't even know. That's all going into the lungs. Those are all chemicals that are just totally wrecking a person's lungs and causing, when we get the lungs that fill up with fluid or phlegm, it's the lungs are trying to repair themselves from the damage, okay? So parasitic infections is another big thing. I'll get into some of the stuff that we take for this, but I'm going to go through the list of all of these things that you wouldn't even think that are your lungs. Food allergies. How many people, like, again, you can see people. It happens to me if I eat the wrong thing. Many people, it's dairy or it's wheat or something, or sugar, okay? and they'll start to get snotty, right? And a lot of people don't notice it, but start paying attention. If you eat something and start coughing, or start getting runny nose, or start getting the phlegm, for me it's alcohol. I can't digest alcohol, and it immediately, like within that a couple hours and later that day, my wife is like, "Did you drink again?" And I don't, because unless I'm at a party or something like that, and I have to prepare with glutathione. If I take my glutathione before I drink some alcohol, I'm not so bad, but it still causes a problem. So I've got an allergy to it, and it's the sugars. Alcohol is a sugar. And what it does is it feeds these bacteria and feeds these other living things that my lungs and my sinuses build this extra mucus to kind of go, we need to get this stuff out of here. So food allergies, dairy is one of the top ones, and there can be, people go, well, I don't drink milk anymore, but there's dairy that's in all kinds of stuff. There's dairies in crackers, there's dairy in all kinds of food. And so many times people having food allergies, what happens is it will then start to build up in the sinuses and then build up in the lungs. And as I said, it fills up with the mucus because it's trying to expel it. It's trying to get it out. Okay, and you take a person who has had born with a food allergy and they're 40, 50 years old before they even think about it. That's 5 decades of poisoning yourself. So when you're having a lung reaction or a sinus reaction, that's a reaction to a poison. So if you're poisoning yourself, like Munchausen by proxy, like, instead of the mom that's poisoning the little girl in The Sixth Sense in that movie, remember the one that was thrown up and it's because the mom was poisoning her? What if it's you? You're the one that's poisoning yourself. So there's good tests that you can take for food allergies. You can go to your doctor and they do the scratch test, but now you can order these tests. They can test your stool, they can test your saliva, you can send them away, and even blood, and so there's really good tests to find out where your whole digestive process is, and you can fix it. But here's another way to fix it, which is people can always do an eliminatory one, which is an elimination diet, which is get rid of the dairy, the wheat, this type of stuff. Eat that way for about 21 days and see if you're better. And if you stop snorting, if you stop getting stuffy and all this other stuff, then you can start bringing things back in, and then you'll have a reaction to it immediately. So one of the best diets that I know of that is an elimination diet is what's called the meat and greens. Basically beef and broccoli without the rice and without the sauce. Basically you can eat hamburger, you can eat stewed meat, or any of the meats, okay? But especially beef is a good one because nobody is allergic to beef. Right? Maybe people can't digest the protein very well, so that's another issue. But there are no allergies in beef, and there are no allergies in broccoli or kale or collards or the greens or something like that. And then the other thing is there's not enough sugar in these things to actually, because sometimes when people are building allergies, it's the sugar. If you've got, let's say, too many candida or too many yeast, then what's happening is every time you eat something that has any kind of sugar or even a carbohydrate, including rice or potatoes or something like that, that's enough sugar to ferment. Like, keep in mind, they make vodka out of potatoes. So there's people that eating the French fries, you are brewing because you don't digest it very well, and it starts to ferment, and then it starts to break down. And because you have so many of these yeasts inside your body, you bloat up. You eat the French fries, you eat the pizza, which is bread, you bloat up because these little colonies start going blah, 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 and they start growing. And yeast, what does yeast do? It eats sugar, and then it produces as a waste product carbon dioxide and alcohol, okay? And so your body is producing, and so many times the lung reaction is just because it's a reaction to these toxins that you just grew through the sugar, okay? Carbohydrates. So, and then on top of that, you can have people that have, for instance, an allergy to eggs, or an allergy to, the top ones would be dairy, would be wheat, the grains, these types of things. So the meat and greens is a great eliminatory diet, and you're not going to die. You can survive on that. And I mean, it's 3 meals a day. That's all you eat, which is you don't get to eat anything else. You can survive on that. You get bored after a while, but it's fine. Some people find it to be just a glorious break. And it's something that that basically you can survive on, but it doesn't provide any of the things for your immune system to react to, and not enough sugar for any of the yeast to grow, so it'll starve these things out. Then after about 14 to 21 days, I like around 21 days, then you can then bring something back in. Then you can bring, let's say, a fruit back in, or then let's say bring some milk in. And within that, if you've eliminated that out, you'll know immediately. If you start to get snotty and stuffy and coughy or any type of reaction, bloating, you know you got a problem with milk, right? And then you take it out. And if you don't have a problem with it, then you can bring it back in. You can start bringing things back in and start to weed out, is my problem some sort of food allergy? Another thing that we see with excess phlegm in the lungs is bad pH. You are too acid in your tissues and too alkaline in your stomach. Now, many people go the way which is, well, I'll just drink my alkaline water. I'll just do all these alkaline foods. Well, where's that food have to go, or where's that alkaline water have to go? You swallow it, where's it go? It has to go into your stomach. Well, what's your stomach? Your stomach is hydrochloric acid. And so if you are alkalizing your stomach, which is supposed to be acid, what it does is it actually does the inverse, and it ruins your stomach, and it doesn't really leach into the system like you think it does. So actually the best way to alkalize your tissues is to acidify your stomach. Add more acid to your stomach. When your stomach is acid, then your tissues become more alkaline, okay, which then will reduce the amount of phlegm that you form. So the hydrochloric acid, which is this pill that you can take with food, that helps to acidify the stomach. Then also pH is minerals. Low minerals, people not having enough minerals. That's, magnesium, potassium, sodium, plus all the trace minerals. You can get by using sea salt, if your average adult weight, over 100 pounds, it's about a teaspoon a day. That's not too much, and that's sea salt, that's not table salt. Plus you can also take minerals in, I like the fermented greens, or the green powder. That's all of your minerals coming from, let's say, kale and some of the grasses, not including wheatgrass, so it doesn't have wheatgrass in it anymore for some people that are sensitive. But it's all these greens that are super, super high in minerals. You can also take other mineral support. Biotics makes this a good multi-min. Standard Process makes a good organically bound minerals. Premier Research Labs makes a good pH minerals liquid. That one is also includes all of the trace minerals like vanadium and lithium and all these other things. And so there's a lot of ways to get minerals in. And getting minerals is your pH. And when you fix your pH, then most of your lung problems go away. Because the lungs, having lung problems are a reaction. And keep in mind, people that ended up, well, I'm on a breathing treatment and I caught this thing and now my lungs they already had problems with their lungs. They're not really healthy people. So this thing that you think is like, oh, it's attacking people's lungs, they got a problem with their issues. Now, that's not to say there's a couple of cases where they were healthy and then it attacked their lungs. It's hard to tell with what the news is and again, what they're reporting and how they write it down. It changed everything. So I can just tell you, I've been in the healthcare field for 25 years and I've seen it all and I've heard it all and interacted with it all. And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, people that end up with pneumonia on a breathing treatment is they already had a problem. And I'm going through the checklist of where these things come from. Then the other thing is poor breathing. People don't breathe deep. Now, you got to understand your lungs. Okay, if you can see me on the screen or you can hear me, right underneath your collarbones, okay, underneath your shoulders, right? So if you go to your throat and then go out those collarbones, that's where your lungs start. Your lungs start all the way up there and then go all the way down to your rib cage, right? Where your rib cage kind of curves up underneath. That's how big your lungs are. And you've got a left lobe and a right lobe, but your lungs are actually split into, essentially each lung is 2 sections. You've got the upper lungs and you've got the lower lungs, okay? And when you find many people that are having the pneumonia or the fluid in the lungs, it's in the lower lobes. And what it turns out is that you get a bunch of people is because they don't breathe correctly. And they never pull. You get a lot of people that do this chest breathing where their chest is heaving and they never breathe into their belly. They don't know how to activate their diaphragm. What that means is the lower lungs, which your lower lungs are actually the bigger section. There's more air that goes into those air sacs. Well, they become atrophied because people don't use them. And so many times people with lung problems have had decades of not breathing any air into those lungs, those lower lobes, and they become atrophied because the air sacs, or what's called alveoli, they look like little grapes, little bundles of grapes. And so people that are chest breathers, or the what you would call the sympathetic breathers, or the fight or flight breathing, they breathe into the chest and they never breathe down into the lower lungs, right? They don't know how to breathe. They forgot how to breathe. They don't use their diaphragmatic muscle. And so what that means is there's many people that have a lot of lung problems. It's because this dirty basement of their lowered lobes of lungs is deoxygenated, is atrophied, is very small, and it doesn't get a lot of action. And so it's a place for stuff to grow. It's a perfect breeding ground for stuff to grow. So anyone that goes into the hospital and has had, let's say, breathing problems or something like that, they have you do breathing treatment, plus they send you home with these breathing machines, which is, there's one, you breathe into this thing and you have to blow and make the little ball go up, and you have to, so there's one that's the blowing, you're trying to increase what's called the tidal volume, how much air. And then there's another one where you have to suck in the air, and the same thing happens, which you have to make this little ball. And so, and you can buy these at CVS and stuff like that. They're like $14. They're cheap. This is a great way to exercise your lungs and to actually build the lung capacity and to expand these lower lungs. Then we do what's called diaphragmatic breathing, which is, look at a little baby breathing, and as they breathe, their little belly goes up. As you inhale, your belly should go out. And as you exhale, your belly should go in. Now have a person take a deep breath and they do the opposite. Most people have been programmed to be like, suck it in and just make yourself look skinny. And it all goes into their chest. Wrong. So what you do is you retrain yourself and you breathe and you make yourself fat. You breathe air and it's not going into your stomach. But what's happening is your diaphragm is flattening out, because your diaphragm is like a dome muscle. And when it's relaxed, it's as a dome shape. But then as it flexes, it flattens, it pulls down, which then pulls air through what's called negative pressure, and air just flows into your lungs because the atmospheric pressure and the internal pressure is different, and air flows into a vacuum. So you create a vacuum. And so, but where it goes when you do good diaphragmatic breathing is it goes all the way down to the bottom lobes of your lung, the lower lobes of your lung, which are bigger, and you get more oxygen. So it's better for you. And then also the higher lungs, okay? So many people that have this bad breathing problem, again, it goes back to a mineral deficiency, which is magnesium. When people have a magnesium, because you'll find many people that have poor lung capacity and atrophied lower lungs, their muscles are tight. Feel their back muscle, feel their neck muscle. They're very tight. And if they're low in magnesium, magnesium is a mineral that's a muscle relaxant. It relaxes the muscle. And the diaphragm is a muscle, okay? And then also around the lungs and stuff like that. So what can happen is people can't get as much air in the bellows of their lungs because their muscles are so tight, and you have to relax. And if you're super tight, then the bag doesn't open. If you're holding tight the bag or holding tight the sponge, because they're also kind of like a sponge, it can't open. And if it can't open, then it can't pull the air into it. So that's another big key of people with a lot of chronic lung problems. That is going to make you a very bad candidate for catching something and ended up having to have some bad lung things. As I said, people with the bad lungs, people with this bad problem going on, they started with problems in their lungs. And it wasn't they have asthma, right? Again, what started asthma? How many times have people they got asthma, because of these other issues. They got bad teeth, they got bad pH, they got some parasitic infection, they've got some other types of, they got low magnesium. So there's so many things that are the precursors to bad lung problems. Another thing that is a top thing you're almost never going to find an emergency room doctor is, they wouldn't know what to look for, is a cervical and vertebral subluxation. What's that, Jason? That's your chiropractor, okay? That's your massage therapist. That's your yoga. That's your stretching. That's your car accident. That's your twisted neck. Because your brain has to control your lungs, has to control these muscles that we're talking about. Well, how does it get there? There's wires, which are those your nerves, and there's vertebrae, which are the hard bones that protect it. So if your vertebrae is out of alignment, then your lungs don't work correctly. And if your lungs don't work correctly, then they're not getting enough air in, they're not exhaling enough, and then they tend to get stagnant, and they can build a lot of the swampy crap stuff that is just a ticking time bomb for, this, a lung problem, ending up in the hospital and on a breathing treatment that eventually doesn't work, and then your lungs just turn into a ball of goo, and then you die, right? Well, how did this happen? Is it the virus that did it to these people? No. Let me remind people. When people are having the lung problems, it's because of the bacteria. Now, it may be the virus that started off that, but then it becomes a ticking time bomb of the body, then goes from one, it can't get the waste products out. And when it can't get the waste products out, and when the lungs when you can't get enough oxygen in, then the lungs start to rot, and it becomes a breeding ground for these other bacteria, and especially these non-oxygen. So the lungs are always full of oxygen, and these little bacteria that are waiting for the oxygen to go away so that they can go in there and go, goody, we can set up shop. They invade, and they invade into these tissues. And as a person's weaker with not enough oxygen, and then they start to lower energy and their immune system goes, then it becomes a cascade and it just goes boom, 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 boom on top of it. So that's why some people can go very, very fast, right? And then they put them on a breathing treatment and their lungs are just paper thin and just, a swamp, and they can't handle it. But as I said, this didn't start with the virus 9 times out of 10. It started with other issues that were making the weak lungs. So, what can I do to protect me? Oh, I got to put this on and I got to stick this in my body too because I'm so scared. Fix your body. And if this thing is the worst thing that it does is really attack the lungs. Those are the worst problems that we have from it, is fix your lungs. I didn't know I had problems with my lungs. Okay, if you're coughing and snorting all the time, if you got some cervical subluxations, you got bad pH, you got some bad teeth, you got some sinus infections, all of these things, you don't breathe correctly, you're scared and upset and angry and afraid all the time, you breathe like this. These are all of these things that if you could fix that, you'd be able to clean your lungs out, and this wouldn't set up shop in your lungs, and you don't have to worry about it, right? Make sure I've gone over everything. And again, yes, smoking's bad, right? But this got pinned because there are so many people, especially nowadays, that have these really bad lung conditions, and you go, were you a smoker? No, they weren't a smoker. Then why do you got these problems of your lungs? You don't have to necessarily be a smoker. And there are many people that are smokers and, multiple pack-a-day smokers, and their lungs are relatively fine and they can smoke. What's the problem? What's the issue with that? There's other conditions of the immune system and what we call inflammation. And some people are really good anti-inflammatories. Some people produce a lot of anti-inflammation. I got a question here. Do swimmers tend to have better lungs? Should we be holding breath every now and then? Yes. That is actually one of the other great ways. Now that breathes into, if you want to get into high level of how do I train my lungs, okay? We talked about the lung treatments with those breathing treatments. Now, this has been recommended for people that, for instance, want to go to, well, let me get back to this. So let's say a person wants to train for, let's say, a marathon, or let's say the baseball players that grow up here in Michigan, and then they're going to go play out in Denver, right? Where you're at a higher altitude. these guys that have not trained for altitude, or let's say you're training to go climb Mount Everest, right? You don't just all of a sudden do it. What they do is have to exercise their lungs. And so the breathing treatment, like I talked about, there's the breathe out machine, then there's the breathe in machine. Yes, there's holding your breath, okay? Then there's a couple other techniques, which is you can go to a pool, and if you go 10 feet below, you can feel the pressure on you. Take a big deep breath and go below, okay? Go below and actually hold your breath at that 10 feet, and it puts pressure on your lungs. Then there's another trick that they can do, which is, again, these real trainers, what they do is they actually have an oxygen tank or an oxygen tube down there, and what they do is they have a person, before they go down, they take a breath, then exhale all their breath, and then go down to the 10 feet and then breathe in the air there, underwater, under the 10 feet, and it expands their lungs because the air under pressure. And then what they do, and they have to be careful because you can kind of actually damage your lungs with this, is then they go up. And as you go up to the surface, it actually expands the lungs and it stretches the lungs. And so they have to hold their breath as they're going up and then blow their air out. So when you learn in scuba diving, when you're going up from below, don't hold your breath. Keep blowing your air out because the air expands as it gets has less atmospheric pressure. As it gets closer to the surface, the air expands. And so if you're taking a breath with your oxygen tank and then you're going from 20 feet to 10 feet to up to the surface, holding your breath, the air is expanding and it will basically can tear your lungs. But this is a technique, holding the breath as well as this atmospheric pressure. Like I said, this is high level stuff. So there's things that you can do to actually increase safely your lungs, your lung capacity, which is called tidal volume, which is how big the air sacs are. But then you want the alveoli, the little air sacs, to grow. And so yes, there are definitely techniques that people do this. Like I said, all the baseball players know this, which is because the baseball players that don't prepare for this and they go out there, they suck. The guy that would normally do the home run and like, woohoo, he goes out there, does the home run, and he can't make it to third base. He can't breathe because at that higher altitude, there's less oxygen. Even though the ball goes farther, so there's way more home runs because the atmospheric pressure of the ball, you can hit the bar farther, your oxygen saturation is much lower unless you train for it. And that's why the guys that train in Denver, they come here. When they go to, let's say, closer to sea level, they're almost like superhuman because they have been conditioned for that. So yes, oxygen saturation is something that can work. Got another question here. It says, I haven't been able to listen to this whole program. I just want to ask if oxygen drops or pills can be helpful for these issues. No, not really. Not really. Again, can I get more oxygen? Here's one way you can actually get oxygen, and what's more important than oxygen? Nitric oxide. So nitrogen that binds with oxygen actually builds your blood vessels. You make bigger tubes. So all of the bodybuilders know this, which is if you're building your muscles, the bigger your muscle get, the more blood it needs. Well, how's that blood get there? The blood gets there through the tube. So when you see these bodybuilders that have these great big veins and arteries popping out, they grew that way because as they exercise, the body produces more nitric oxide. Well, you can trick the body into doing this by taking nitric oxide boosters. And a great nitric oxide booster is beets. And in particular, there's beet powder, but in particular, there's fermented beet powder. Premier Research Labs makes this, and you put it in your smoothie, 1 scoop or 2. So if you got breathing problems, yes, taking nitric oxide booster will help you to breathe better because you don't have to get as much oxygen to actually get the benefit of oxygen. And when we produce more nitric oxide, the more nitric oxide that we have, it makes our muscles, keep in mind everything's a muscle, and it all has to be fed through the tubes of the oxygen has to get through the artery, which came from your lungs, and then the carbon dioxide has to go into the vein, which goes to your lungs. So your lungs are the things that are breathing for your muscles, and it breathes the gases, which then the gases get pumped into the blood. And then oxygen, an O2, that then gets bound with a nitrogen, becomes NO2. That's what you put in your funny cars, nitrous oxide, and it makes it go faster. It makes it become superpowered, supercharged. Well, it makes you become supercharged in your brain and your body, but the more nitric oxide, it produces a signal inside your body to actually grow your veins and arteries. The walls get thicker and the diameter gets bigger because it prepares itself to carry more blood. So you can get it to carry more blood, and the more blood it carries, the more oxygen that you have, meaning the less hard you have to breathe, the less deeper you have to breathe, the more that you get out of a breath, the more exhale, the more of the bad gases you get out, which is better on your heart. So your heart actually, so this is top in terms of cardiovascular health, nitric oxide, which is you got people with a bad ticker, and you want to clean the arteries out, but you also want to increase because when people have heart problems, the muscle of the heart gets too thick and it gets too big, and then it can't pump as well. So nitric oxide not only grows the diameter of your veins and arteries, getting better blood, better oxygenation, but it also triggers your heart muscle to get the correct size. If it's too thick and too like a big bulky muscle, it can't flex. It becomes too Arnold Schwarzenegger. And muscles are best being strong but flexible. So Bruce Lee, pound for pound, was much stronger than Arnold. Arnold looked big and bulky, but so again, there's a measurement in terms of the flexibility of a muscle compared to its strength. And the bulkier muscle is, actually the less strength it has, because a longer muscle is actually able to travel more distance as opposed to a big bulky muscle can only go this far. So it shortens and contracts and relaxes less distance, even though it seems like it's stronger. So the heart muscle actually has to be nice and flexible. So yes, people talk about oxygen pills. Now, there are some things that you can do in terms of putting some oxygen in water, structuring water, hydrogen peroxide in water. However, you don't want to put hydrogen peroxide in water because it will bubble up in your guts and stuff like that, and it can be kind of dangerous. So you got to be careful about ingesting oxygen. And like I said, we're trying to shortcut it by putting, can I just put it in the water? No, the oxygen has to be breathed in through your lungs to then get into your bloodstream. And you really can't short circuit it. Like I said, the only other short circuit really way is to the nitric oxide boosters, and that's the fermented beets. And like I said, so if people want to rebuild their cardiovascular as well as their pulmonary, pulmonary is the lungs. Premier Research Labs also makes another really good thing, which is if you already have pretty good lungs and you want to keep them, and you basically want to make sure that your lungs stay good, which is called Pneumoven. Pneumoven is something that's really good for maintaining health, and if your lungs tend to be kind of weak and you have these lung problems, it's a great food. Anything that the ven is actually food for the lungs. Another thing that's really good getting back into when we talked about infections, the Cardio ND, that's really good for the dental infections. The Cardio ND is a liquid, it has lots of garlic in it, hawthorn berry and other stuff, so it's really good for the blood. Blood is your lungs. Keep in mind, people go, well, it doesn't make sense. The air you breathe has to go into your blood, and the oxygen or the exhale, which is the carbon dioxide I breathe out, has to come from your blood. It all goes through the lungs. This is how it happens, okay? So the Cardio ND, the alicidin, this is another form of garlic, high levels of garlic. Garlic is just a broad spectrum everything. The parasitic type of stuff, there's two different formulas. One for the hookworms and the roundworms and those type of things, that's called the Parastat. And then for the flatworms and other ones like that, like the liver flukes, there's Paratocin. Okay, different formulas. Okay. Let me see, HCl we talked about, minerals, there's a whole bunch of different sources of minerals that we can take. And then the other thing that's really good for breathing is exercise. Bouncing exercise. Now, if you can't, you're too old and you're not strong enough to go out and run, running is a great exercise because it gets it to bounce, 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 okay? You can also get one of those little jogging tramps, or you can bounce up and down, do your calisthenics, jumping jacks, those types of things, because that smacks against your lungs. Your diaphragm smacks against it, especially on that little jogging tramp. What it does is, for a little mini second, you are negative, meaning you're anti-gravity, and then you have increased gravity. So it goes boom, 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 and it squeezes all your tissues, but in particular, it squeezes your lungs. It squeezes your diaphragm, and it pumps your lungs, and it exercises your lungs. And then the type of air that you can breathe, right? When you can, open up your windows and get more good air. When you can, get outside in good clean air out in the woods. When you can, on the days that it's raining, right, open up your windows and get that misty air because it's high in negative ions. Really good for your lungs. High in ozone, especially when you're out when there's a lightning storm. You can smell it in the air, that smell that's in the air. It's very good for your lungs. People on the opposite end, which is if you tend towards having, like, say, the smog, or for instance, if it's really humid, that can be really hard on people with lungs, then you're going to have to get into good, clean air. So on people that have some bad lung issues, while you're buying your time fixing your lungs, you have to kind of guard the air. For some people, getting some air filters, some really good air filters. There's really good air filter things that also include ultraviolet. By sanitizing the air, it kills the bacteria and pathogens in the air as it filters it, and then it also produces ozone. These really good ozone generators that you can put in there. Also, for people that, for instance, have been struggling with some breathing problems, you can always go to an oxygen bar. Go to an oxygen bar and sit there, and you can pay for 30 minutes of sitting there where they're putting your own fresh nasal cannula, which is you're not using somebody else's, and they're putting straight oxygen into your body, into your lungs. You can always even buy these little oxygenators, like you see grandma walking around the grocery store carrying this thing. I know a bunch of top athletes. I, for many years in my career as a top massage therapist, as a clinical and sports massage therapist, I have worked with professional athletes, and in particular, the Pistons, the guys that I worked with. And these guys that know what they're doing, they got these machines in their houses. They got hyperbaric chambers in their houses, or they do what's called EWA, which is exercise with oxygen therapy, or even better, which is called Live O2, is this whole system of, Dr. Joel Kahn talked a lot about this, is what you do is you can get on a bike. You can get on, let's say, a stationary bike or on the running machine or something like that, and you wear this mask. And it's a machine that then goes into a bag. And what it does is it holds oxygen. And then you have this little switch thing. And what it does is, as you're running, you can switch it on. So what you do is as you're running and you're huffing and puffing and puffing, what you do is you then go as hard as you can and you turn the oxygen off. So it actually restricts the oxygen. And you're starting to struggle, and you'll do that for, like, say, 6 to 10 seconds, and you can barely make it. And then you flip a switch, and what happens is it immediately goes into the mask and it floods it with 100%, 80% to 100% oxygen. And now you get this deep breath of air. Well, what it does is your muscles, especially your lungs, as they're starving from oxygen, they're starving. And normally what would happen is a person stops and gets their breath. Well, they have to breathe and breathe and breathe because there's only so much oxygen in the atmosphere. So what they do is you flood the system with oxygen as you are in what's called an oxygen deprivation. And the oxygen, now the cells, not just the lungs, but the cells throughout your body that are starving of oxygen, now suck up the oxygen. And it floods the oxygen. And then what you do is they cycle back and forth between this low oxygen and high oxygen. Low oxygen, high, as you're exercising. And what it does is you can take a person, like, there's a lot of top athletes, but you can take a regular person that's not an athlete and you can turn their lungs and heal their body. This is used for brain problems. This, Dr. Joel Kahn, who's this cardiologist, top cardiologist here in Michigan, and I send clients to him and we go back and forth. He's a good friend of mine. But he's into these machines, and especially for people with cardiovascular issues, because he is the drug-free, surgery-free. He's done it, but he works with people without surgery. How do I fix your heart? Instead of having quadruple bypass, what do? And again, when we're talking about the heart, we're talking about the lungs. The heart and the lungs, the pulmonary cardiovascular system, they're linked. They're together. That's how they get it. Okay, so getting the air into the lungs and into the bloodstream fixes the heart. And so there's some great tools of how do I fix the lungs. And as I said, these are all about lung issues. And the top thing is because people are scared out of their mind about like, oh my God, I'm going to end up in the hospital. I'm going to catch this thing. I better wear my mask or whatever because this thing's horrible. Keep in mind the people that are these cases that you hear about, right? And not just a positive case, but the case that are hospitalized and are ventilized. If you really knew the truth about them, almost 100% of them had issues. They had issues. They had diabetes. They had lung issues. They had cardiovascular issues. They had kidney issues. They had low minerals. They had all of these things that led towards their multiple issues. That's why their lungs were so bad. That's why it hit them so hard. That's why their recovery is so bad, right? So, rather than being afraid, work on, and this is everybody. Everybody's got to work on their lungs. Everyone could work on their lungs. And as Rob put in, is there something I could do for my lungs? Swimmers tend to have really good lungs. Well, they do is because they have to hold their breath, and they do working at holding the breath. Well, you can even do that as you're exercising. You can even do that as you're just standing there at the kitchen sink. Take a breath in and hold your breath. Hold your breath as you're doing this. And then you can also do the other one, which is take your breath in, blow your breath out, all the air out, and see how long you can hold your breath without oxygen. Don't be careful. Don't pass out, knock your head out, and stuff like that. But as you practice with this, you will exercise your lungs. And as you exercise your lungs, you're actually exercising all of your cells. You're training all of your cells. And you're training your brain, because you train your brain to actually become more efficient with more oxygen, less oxygen. It becomes more efficient at it, pulls oxygen in and dumps carbon dioxide. Because keep in mind, when people hyperventilate, what they do is have them breathe into a bag, because some of our oxygen or lung issues is that we're not holding on to enough carbon dioxide. It's very complicated. The lungs are weird, which is, I thought carbon dioxide was bad. Yeah, but if you don't have enough carbon dioxide and you have too much oxygen, that's bad too. So a lot of times when people are freaking out and hyperventilating and they're getting too much oxygen and not enough carbon dioxide. So it's the balance of these gases. And so learning how to breathe correctly is so, so important. And there's a lot of exercises that you can do. Jumping jacks is great. Good old calisthenics. One of the best exercises, the best exercises for your lungs, that's why all of the boxers do it, is jump rope. Jump rope, right? Because you're using your arms. Again, when they say you're having a hard time breathing, hold your arms up above your head. Makes the blood go out of your arms and go into your lungs, and it takes the pressure off your lungs. So a person who's running and is almost ready to pass out, like say a person that runs a marathon, they will definitely put the mask on them, but they'll also tell them, hold your arms up above your head, because if you're about ready to pass out because you're so dizzy, you get the blood. So jumping, not just jumping jacks, but also doing the jump rope, you are moving the arms as you're bouncing up and down, and it's pounding your lungs, and it's also making your arms work. Like I've had little babies, little baby animals that I brought back to life by not only breathing in them, but opening their arms, using their arms, because you don't really pump on their heart. It's one of the things that they tell you with animals, which is how do you bring them back to life, is you move their arms, because that moves their lungs and it pumps their heart, but it actually gets the air into their lungs. So as a human being, using the arms as we then run or bounce, even more so pumps the lungs, and just the mechanical action pumps the lungs. So one of the best exercises for building endurance and fixing the lungs and making tip-top, oxygenation is jump rope. So I went on a lot of stuff. Boy, so till next time, this is Jason Eagle, your Natural Health Authority. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all your questions, and I'm always here for you. Remember that. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks for watching. I invite you to press the like button because you liked what I had to say about your health, and also press the subscribe button to be able to easily find me and also be part of this. I look forward to helping you reclaim your health naturally.